Good evening, everyone. I'm Madeline Fortier, and I'm the social media director of the Buckley program. This evening, I have the honor of introducing American businessman and political writer, Mr. Neal B. Freeman. He'll be making a tribute tonight to the firing line and Bill Buckley. In 1962, Mr. Freeman received his BA magna cum laude from Yale University. Mr. Freeman began his career with Doubleday & Co. publishers and soon joined the Hearst Corporation as an editor. Mr. Freeman worked his way up to become an executive, but in 1981, he decided to found his own firm, the Blackwell Corporation, which he is currently chairman of. As television producer, Mr. Freeman has produced over 1,000 programs for national broadcast. He has won many awards for journalistic excellence, including an Emmy and a George Foster Peabody Award. Mr. Freeman also served in the Reagan administration as the director of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Since this appointment, Mr. Freeman has been active in the effort to privatize international communications. Mr. Freeman, as former director of the National Review and in his various publishing, broadcasting, and political ventures, was often associated with William F. Buckley, Jr. We are honored to host Mr. Neal B. Freeman here today. And now, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Neal Freeman.
Thank you. I had no idea my dinner partner was my introducer. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Yale Buckley Fellows, for reminding our alma mater what a great university should be. Could we have all the Buckley Fellows stand for a moment? Thank you. Thank you. Well done. It was always a good time to be William F. Buckley, Jr. But in the last few months of 1965, it was perfect heaven. He had just completed his campaign for mayor of New York under the brilliant management of his brother Jim and myself. He had finished a distant third. From Bill's perspective, and for several reasons, this was the optimal outcome. First, of course, there was no need to demand a recount. Second, there had been no regrets, on Bill's part, that is. My own regret hardened when I learned that before he ran for public office, the current mayor of New York had changed his name from Warren Wilhelm to Bill de Blasio. Damn, why didn't we think of that? Imagine how Bill Buckley would have run in the Bronx as, say, Vince Provolone. Third, unlike John Lindsay, who won the election, Bill had no obligation to serve. Poor Mr. Lindsay, despite the sound advice of our friend Jeff Greenfield, as Bill had long predicted, and as history would soon record, would prove incapable of discharging those responsibilities. Instead, he forced his faddish liberalism toward its ordained conclusion. Racial discord, work stoppage, waves of crime, blue sky budgets, and off at the end, municipal bankruptcy. Bill Buckley, in many ways a saintly fellow, yielded to the temptation to remind New Yorkers that he had told them so. But the most important benefits of the campaign accrued to Bill personally. He had begun the race as the editor of a small magazine, a man as well known, roughly speaking, as the current editor of the New Republic. whoever that might be. But he finished it by granting valedictory interviews not only to the big American networks, but to NHK in Japan, RTF in Europe, the BBC, and so on. By the end of the campaign, Bill Buckley had become Bill Buckley. As soon as the Board of Elections certified his defeat, he took a victory lap and asked me to tag along. Morning, noon, and night, he was feted by the grandees of New York publishing, broadcasting, organizations of every type, commercial, fraternal, and so on. Just almost every meeting would end with an offer for Bill to work part-time or full-time or, okay, how about almost no time? Just as poor Mr. Lindsay would be pleading with the transit union to provide subway service, Bill would be thanking his hosts for their warm hospitality and their generous offer. The most generous of the broadcast offers came from RKO General, then headquartered quite literally on Broadway. The producer assigned to the project certainly looked the part, sleek, well-tailored. He began by reciting a long list of his production credits, all of which were lost on Bill. Bill's strong suit was not popular culture. He once leaned over to me at a press conference in New York City and said, "Who is this Mickey Mantle they speak of?" But Bill was the polite sort, so he nodded agreeably as the recitation rolled on, as if he were reliving cherished moments in TV history. Mr. RKO wrapped up his presentation by stating, given his vast experience in talent management, he was confident he could mold Bill into a national TV personality. Oops. The last man who had tried to mold William F. Buckley Jr. had been William F. Buckley Sr. Bill was not a man for molding. He cleared his throat in that familiar polysyllabic way and said, "Well, this is a bit awkward, inasmuch as I have retained my own producer." Mr. RKO, his incredulity barely disguised, asked, "And who might that be?" Bill, arching the articulate eyebrow, replied, "Neal has agreed to produce the show." I shot my cuffs and tried to look as if my flabber had not been gasted. The soul of insouciance, Bill then flies off to Switzerland to write his campaign book, leaving the minor details of production and distribution to his newly minted producer. I did not for a moment mistake my new assignment as a vote of plenipotentiary confidence. Bill was a man of the printed word. In those days, he never watched TV, tended to regard it as more of a persistent rumor than a current reality. Indeed, when he returned to New York in the spring of '66, he was surprised and a bit put out to find out we would actually be going on the air in a few weeks. He was especially grumpy about the name Firing Line, deeming it far too combative. The series debuted in April 1966 on RKO's flagship station, WOR-TV in New York. Those of you who remember Firing Line as sort of a clubby forum for literary lions would not recognize those early shows. John Kenneth Galbraith and Christopher Hitchens were nowhere to be seen. The guest was much more likely to be a race hustler, a war resistor, a campus crazy, a gender bender. The ideological clash was raw, frontal, and intentional. The station promoted the show as the fight of the week. And the question implicit in every guest invitation was, think you can last 8 rounds with Kid Buckley? Bill was young, he was handsome, he was tack sharp, and yes, he was highly combative. The program soon built an audience in the New York area, and we began to sell it across the country in the old-fashioned way, bicycling tapes from city to city. Within a very few months, it was clear that Bill was becoming a star, Firing Line was becoming a hit. I remember calling him from Hawaii with news that with a Honolulu station coming aboard, we were now on the coast, on the air from coast to coast to coast. Bill responded dryly, as was his habit, "May I hope that we're now poised for an assault on Anchorage?" With the series well established and widely syndicated, I felt free to leave and resume my own corporate career. To replace me, I recommended a young man named Warren Steibel. Unlike his predecessor, Warren was an experienced professional. It was he who managed the transition to PBS in 1971. It was he who settled Bill into his role as the more intellectually elegant American version of that British bumpkin Alistair Cooke. It was Warren who produced the programs many of you remember, the programs with Galbraith and Hitchens, Norman Mailer and Milton Friedman, not to mention the electric Jeff Greenfield and the great Tom Wolfe. In later years, Bill didn't like to be reminded of Firing Line's early rough and tumble days. In his book on the 25th anniversary of the program, he barely mentions them. But he was proud then and proud later of his accomplishment. He had succeeded on commercial television's own terms, in buzz, in demographics, in program revenues. No history of the program would be complete without remarking the sheer theatricality of Bill's performance. There was first the power of language. Bill deployed his overstuffed vocabulary to instruct and illuminate, but just as often to stun or intimidate. When he would ask a guest, for instance, if his position was mere velleity, or for another instance, if the guest's position approached reality asymptotically, the guest's eyes would widen with apprehension as he considered the possibility his appearance had been a bad career choice. Then there was the body language. Given a rough-hewn bench or even a slab of concrete, Bill could drape his long frame across it in a pose of cocktail lounge cool. The guest, of course, would be sitting bolt upright, strapped into the middle seat on a commuter flight. Then there was the voice. You heard it. Bill Buckley spent much of his life in search of the perfect word. When he found it, which he did more often than anybody else, he would make love to it, squeezing every nuance from it in a syrupy accent that was part English public school, part Southern nanny, part Spanish housemaid, and yet somehow all Buckley. Finally, there was the dramatic arc of the show itself. Bill would script the opening, speaking directly to camera as he framed the topic. Of the first 3 sentences, at least one would be so long and winding as to be undiagrammable by Cleanth Brooks. Bill would then introduce the guest, juxtaposing a $64 adjective to a $64 noun with an effect so befuddling you could almost hear the guest say, "What did he just call me?" Bill would then pose what we in the control room came to call the question. He would press upon the guest a debater's choice between alternative A, which was very bad indeed, and alternative B, which was utterly unacceptable. The guest almost invariably would then lunge for alternative A. The witness had now been read his rights, and with his lawyer unavoidably absent, the interrogation would begin. Over the balance of the show, Bill would nudge his guest gently but firmly down the slippery slope to forensic demise. In the final segment of the show, Bill would thank his guest effusively, as if they had just shared some kind of bonding experience. So benumbing was this post-show bonhomie that the occasional guest would fail to notice that he had just embarrassed himself on national TV. I concede the point. Those early debates were fundamentally unfair. There was no chance in hell that the guest would last 8 rounds with Kid Buckley. What made the show so popular, so watchable, was that it was the only venue in American media where the conservative played the charming and commanding presence, the liberal, the more or less amiable dunce. Thank you.